Thank you, Hank, and President Ernie. Thank you for letting me join you here today. And actually, I'm very, very honored. And I'm honored because when this center first opened a number of years ago, and the sound system was finally upgraded to where you could hear things in the back row, I was sitting at a table in our Rotary Club and talking to this elderly gentleman, and he turned to me and said, "This is going to be my last meeting at Rotary." And I said, "Well, why is that?" And he says, "Well, I can't hear and I can't see very well. And now that you've got the sound system fixed, I realized that I'm at the Rotary meeting instead of the Kiwanis meeting that I'm supposed to go to. And the programs at Kiwanis are a whole lot better than they are here at Rotary. So I am honored to be here, and thank you for inviting me. And I have Ed Brownlee, who I had the pleasure of being able to serve with a number of years ago, a fellow ship captain. So Ed, I'm always glad to be here with you too. When Hank was given the introduction, he failed to be able to talk about how I ended up in Atlanta. And Sheila and I got in a car when I retired from being a ship captain of a cruiser, and we started driving south. And when we finally got to the point where they asked me whether we want sweet tea or real tea, we knew we had reached the northern latitude of wherever it is that we wanted to live. A year or so ago, Sheila and I were out at dinner, and I turned to her and said, "Sheila, in your wildest imaginations, did you ever think that we would have a career in the Navy and a career at Turner Broadcasting, and then we'd be able to sit up here in the mountains of North Carolina and look across this great, great scenery?" And she replied to me and said, "Alec, you have never been in my wildest dreams." I did some research and being able to come here, and I don't know if you know this or not, but Hank Fellows actually has a connection to a World War II ace. His name was Ensign Fellows, and Ensign Fellows was one of the dramatic aces at the Battle of the Coral Sea back in 1942. Ensign Fellows, this was his first flight, and he took off from the carrier and attacked the Japanese, and he shot down 8 Japanese Zeros, and he sank 2 cruisers, and then he sank 4 Japanese destroyers. And he was doing so well that he forgot to watch his fuel gauge, and he ran out of fuel up in the air. Not a problem. He saw a carrier down below, and he circled down and glided onto a landing. And when he got there, he jumped out of the plane, ran up to the bridge, saluted the captain, and said, "Captain, Captain, I shot down 8 Japanese Zeros, sank 2 cruisers, sank 4 destroyers." And the captain saluted him back and said, "Also, very good, Yank. Only make up one mistake." We are approaching the anniversary of the Battle of Midway, so I thought that this might be a great time to take a look at how we did all of that and how we could take Ensign Fellows as a Top Gun and be able to relate that into the Battle of Midway. On a wet, gray, gloomy day in Christmas of 1941, a float plane flew over Diamond Head, went down the coast, over the clock tower at Honolulu, circled Pearl Harbor, and landed on the oily surface of the bay. When the hatch opened, Chester Nimitz looked out, and he had his first whiff of fuel oil on the cover of the bay. And he had the first stench of ships burning. And when he got in the launch to go to shore, they had to avoid debris in the harbor. And they had to avoid boats that were picking up bodies that were still floating to the surface. And they could hear the tapping on the hull of sailors who were in the USS Oklahoma, which had overturned. He turned to one of the staff officers and said, "What news of Wake Island?" And the staff officer turned back to him and said, "Wake has fallen, and the relief force has turned back," he said defeatedly. And so when he continued into the shore and took over command, the news did not get any better. The Philippines fell. During this week in 1941 was the Bataan Death March, where over 5,000 soldiers died. Singapore was overrun by the Chinese. The Asiatic fleet of allies was totally annihilated. Australia was in danger of being invaded. Admiral Nimitz was assuming the job that was probably the most difficult job in military history, and he was about ready to make one of the most momentous decisions ever made in World War II, which was at the same level as D-Day a few years later. And the reason why I think he was ready to make that decision and ready to assume the job was because of his first 60 seconds at the U.S. Naval Academy. It was the same 60 seconds that I had. So let me tell you my story. We checked in at the library, went through the administrative rigmarole that you go through, and then I was directed down a corridor and walked out the door. And I was expecting someone to be standing there welcoming me to the United States Navy. Boy, was I mistaken. There was an upperclassman that said, "Mr. Fraser, get over here, stand up, stick your chin in, and look straight ahead. What is your laundry number?" I had absolutely no idea what my laundry number is, so I said, "I don't know." "That's the wrong answer here. Why don't you know?" Well, I had no idea why I didn't know. Nobody had ever told me that. So I said, "Nobody told me what my laundry number is." "That's the wrong answer too. Drop for 25 push-ups." And I started doing the push-ups, and at 25, I yelled out, "25." And I added the word "sir" because I thought that might help his attitude a little bit. It didn't. "Mr. Fraser, there are 4 answers to questions here at the Naval Academy. No excuse, sir. I'll find out, sir. Yes or no, sir. And aye, aye, sir. Have you got that?" Well, now, pain is a great motivator. "Yes, sir." "Why don't you know what your laundry number is?" "No excuse, sir." "How are you going to find out?" "I'll find out, sir." What is your laundry number, and how are you going to find it out?" "I don't know, sir, but I will find it out quickly." "All right, Mr. Fraser, stand up, go over and get in line over there." And I said, "Aye, aye, sir," and got out of there as fast as I could. Here's the story. My ship was operating in the northern part of the Persian Gulf. We were the radar picket ship for the American forces. We were there to detect bombers heading out of Iraq, going down to bomb oil fields further south in the Persian Gulf. One day, in one of those days, I was back in the back part of the ship, and I was doing a spot maintenance inspection on our after generator. And so the young sailor, who was an electrician, was doing the check, and I was there to make sure that he had the right tools, that he knew how to do the check, that he had been trained properly, and oh, by the way, who had certified the trainer? Over the announcing system, I hear the standard naval terminology: "The presence of the commanding officer is requested in the Combat Information Center." Well, that's a sign that there's something going on. So I thank the sailor for being able to do the maintenance check. He was probably elated that the captain was going to be able to leave. And I started walking back up to the Combat Information Center. And a few seconds later, the general alarm goes off. And it goes, general quarters, all hand, man your battle stations, inbound aircraft." With that, the crew responded quickly. I got a little more excited myself, but it was important to be able to keep walking because I wanted to show the crew that I trusted that they knew what to do, and that I trusted the tactical action officer up in the Combat Information Center to be able to defend the ship by firing the missiles, shooting the guns if he needed to do that. So the sailors are scrambling. All 4 engines are coming on the line. Fire hoses are being laid out. Missile systems and gunnery systems, additional operators are going to their positions. And they do that quickly. And when I finally walked up to the Combat Information Center, I heard the tactical action officer going off on the radio saying, "Unidentified aircraft, this is United States Navy warship. You are standing into danger. Please notify me of who you are and alter course immediately." There was no response. He turned to me and said, "Captain, we detected this aircraft at 40 miles. At the 30 miles, I gave him the warning that you just heard. My intention is to proceed forward with our standard replies. At 20 miles, we are set for general quarters." I said, "Very well." And so at 20 miles, he puts out another radio call to this aircraft and says, "Unidentified aircraft, this is U.S. Navy warship bearing 200, 20 miles from you. You are standing into danger. Please identify yourself and alter course immediately." There was no response. At 10 miles, we gave another warning, but it's a different type of warning. Unidentified aircraft, we are the U.S. Navy warship bearing 200, 10 miles from you. Alter course immediately, or you may be subject to U.S. Navy defensive measures. The tactical action officer turned to the officers seated around him, and he said, gunnery, air action starboard, hold fire. Missile systems, illuminate the inbound aircraft. Electronic jamming, stand by to jam. Stand by to deploy the decoys for missiles. And be ready to fire when I say fire. And after the deck, increase speed to flank speed. Come left to course 290 so we can alter course to be able to engage all of the inbound aircraft. All those were done, and when they illuminated the aircraft coming in, a little buzzer goes off in the pilot's head. And the pilot immediately altered course towards Iran. And we watched him as he passed back over the coast, and then the tactical action officer turned to me and said, Captain, request permission to stand down from general quarters. I said, very well, permission granted. That was the second time that I had said something in an evolution that would perhaps put us into a firing situation. I told the tactical action officer, well done. And then I passed the word to the rest of the crew. And I really think that my first 60 seconds at the Naval Academy were those times that allowed me to be able to train the crew and be able to react the same way that Admiral Nimitz did back in 1941 and 42. I had to have accountability. I was the guy responsible for that electrician to make sure that he was doing the check back aft, to make sure that what was done correctly. I was the guy that was in charge of being able to certify that the tactical action officer had the maturity and the training to be able to fire weapons should he be required to do so. I have found out what I needed to know in order to be able to set procedures to be able to engage an inbound unidentified aircraft. I had a level of trust that I trusted the crew to be able to respond to a crisis without my having to say much, and that they would trust me. And then in the motivation of II, when there's an inbound aircraft, there are people that are really motivated to do what they were assigned to do. So in those 60 seconds that I learned in 1966, they helped me in 1991 the same way they helped Admiral Nimitz.